this video, I want to kind of conclude the app toolbox set by talking a little bit about two ARs and ways that you can make your two ARs as offensive and as useful as possible. The two AR is maybe the most powerful speech in the debate. It is the last speech, which means it's the last thing that you guys choose in terms of all the arguments that are being made in the debate, which means that it has a huge influence in the way the judges are viewing rounds and what they take into their ballot. It's the last kind of words they remember in terms of what they're thinking about and what the key questions are in the debate. And therefore, it is both like kind of like high risk in the fact that it's really easy to tell when certain two ARs are missing key aspects of the debate, the key question of the debate. But it's also very high reward when you feel like a two AR has really pulled all the right stops to kind of make something possible. And so in this video, I kind of want to talk a little bit about ways that you can make your two AR really precise and the different types of things that you need to be thinking about when you write into AR. Again, what kind of structure you can use about how you address this question that focuses a lot less on like whether or not you're going to get to every line by line argument, but focuses a lot more on your ability to kind of know the key kind of things you need to check off to make sure your two AR structurally is doing all the things that it needs to do to really get you a winning ballot. So the first thing that I always say is that your two AR, I think, should always start off by writing the ballot for the judge. One sentence kind of introduction that just explains the key thing that is going to win you the debate. The reason why I think this is good is because it starts you off with a piece of offense. I'll talk a little bit about the importance of that a little bit later on in the video. But I also think what it does is that it immediately gives your judge a way to frame and speak back an exact ballot that you're giving to them. And it allows them to basically understand what the key biggest question on your mind and how you're resolving it is. That one sentence alone can already kind of start to structure your speech in a way which really offensive and comes off as if you're kind of ahead of like what the core of the debate really is. The second thing that I would implore is that everyone weaponize the 1AC. I've talked about this in other videos in terms of just a general app toolbox, but I want to reiterate here because I think there's a large lack of the ability of allowing TARs to really utilize the totality of their 1AC. And I think you make the key difference between a really, really good 2AR that's winning debate and one that might struggle a little bit because it's trying to pull together offense from different speeches that don't really answer the core kind of central question of the debate that started the debate. So, for example, I think first is that when you're thinking about why the 1AC is important, a lot of times 2NRs and 2Ns in general negative teams are really focused on getting their offense across. And a lot of their strategies especially are missing a lot of really good in-depth case strategies that really question the nitty-gritty kind of nuanced things that you may be thinking about in your app. And although all these nuanced questions might not be like relevant in every debate, it is important to pull out the nuance that is relevant in the debate and the evidence and the things that still track from the 1AC all the way to the 2AR. The reason this is important is because it allows you to basically give off the representation that you've kind of already considered the questions that the negative offering from the beginning of the debate, that you aren't throwing off, and that the 1AC at some level can resolve the types of questions that are being asked at the core of what the negative framing is. Weaponizing the 1AC can also be extremely well because if the negative is not answering it, it's basically a block of 8 minutes that you have. There are arguments that are ready to be extended that have hopefully been in your overviews early in the debate that just need to really make it into the 2AR in order to give you offense that you can rely on regardless of the situation. There are some debates where you're put in a position where maybe your offense, the way that you dealt with the off cases, is not so clean. And having a really clean, concise case argument that a judge can at least weigh at a solvency level against other arguments or other options can be incredibly important in terms of giving you that nudge or getting you out of a bad situation that you weren't intended to be in. The second thing is always find a hole in the 2NR. Sometimes I feel like 2ARs are pressured by feeling like a 2NR is like just really offensive and going for things that you may have messed up earlier in the debate. And you kind of like start to get insecure and overthink like what's happening in the debate. But you should always understand that every speech has a time limit, which means it's pretty much almost impossible to give the perfect speech. Every speech is going to be missing something. And your first kind of instinct that you should think about when you hear 2NR is where did it spend the least time on? Where was it the least developed? And how can I pull up our developments in that area in some way to connect the hole that they're having to the nuances that we have earlier in our arguments, and finding this combination can kind of begin to get you out of whatever hole that you're in. I think looking for that kind of place where the 2NR spends the least amount of time developing your argument can be extremely helpful for you to kind of just think about the place where you can place the amount of offense that you have. Maybe the idea that they didn't spend enough time on impact comparison alone doesn't completely loosen the debate, but it can give you leverage in other portions of the debate, like why a permutation might be necessary because of the magnitude of your impact. Why, if you're winning just such a good solvency argument, the lack of exponential on the alternative means that there's a risk that the app could do something better than the alternative. And then it's just a question of being able to use those kind of like holes in the Q&R to kind of contextualize them within a larger framing argument, which I think is where a lot of tutorials should kind of start after their case arguments. I think getting to larger framing arguments, questions about how the judge should be thinking about the role of the ballot, the role that debate serves, and the reason that like research and discourse occurs can be really important to figure out what types of things matter or not. Controlling these big framing questions is important because it allows you to decide what portion of the debate the judge should be really focusing on to evaluate what side they vote for, which means that you can force them to have eyes on the parts of the debate that are most offensive for you and have the most type of development in the types of arguments that you're making, which can put you in a really strategic place for when you kind of like find and put together those holes that I was mentioning a little bit earlier. Your ability to kind of execute why those holes are important come from your ability to consider framing arguments as like key ways to rethink how we're evaluating what's really important in the flow. I think it's always important, additionally, to mark that you should always be exploring your offense at the top, regardless of what flow we're talking about. I think starting with offense at the top is always important because I think you always want to give off the idea that you're ahead of the game. And also, I think it's important to understand that your offense can play roles in how you're making your defense. Your offense can be applied to the way that they're making arguments in such a way that you're kind of covering yourself by winning that there are holes in the theoretical perspective, the way they resolve their structural critique, etc. All of these things can be really important ways that you kind of point out just holes in the way that they're considering what the way that they resolve places that they're solving the data. Being able to explode your offense can be extremely important. Also, getting ahead to things like impact comparison, which I think is a skill that a lot of speeches are missing at the end of the debate, is really showing a way to compare and think about the impacts in the debate as they relate to the kinds of big solid sequences that both sides are going to end up making. You always want to focus your speech on key issues that you can apply across the flow when you're picking out your offense. I said this a little bit in my 1 yard flow, but I want to reiterate it here in case you're watching this and don't do the 1 yard. Is that you focus your speech on trying to find your pieces of offense that apply to the most amount of the flow. What is the offense that is most relevant and feels the most coherent as it's come through the entire debate? If there's a piece of offense that you feel like may not have the biggest impact, but has kind of had a continuous story that you can kind of turn into something that blends with the nuance of your app and really brings out a lot of the nuance in your explanation of your world versus the negatives, then it could be good to just focus your speech on just being able to compose and make that argument extremely descriptive and being able to make it nuanced in that sense. I think that being able to focus your speech on key issues through these kind of framings can be extremely helpful. The last thing that I always try to tell people when getting into AR is that you always want to tell a story. You want to be able to explain the debate as it happened to the judge and the way the debate ends in your way. By being able to tell this story, you're kind of able to bring the judge like all the ways that you've been thinking about the perspective of the round. And by doing so, you can make sure the judge isn't missing key details on how you basically allowed your strategy to unfold and the way that you're able to build an advantage for yourself within the round. Hopefully, some of this stuff was helpful and was able to help you think about how you should get this AR, and hopefully it can help you win some debates. Thank you.